So right now, Putin is furious about what's happening in Iran. He's just on a press conference saying this. And he's furious and he's terrified because there's basically been a triangle, an axis of evil that's existed for a very, very long time, for decades. And that was Moscow, Syria, Iran, and North Korea. Don't forget, it was only just before Christmas that Assad fled to Moscow. He's living in the Four Seasons right now. And remember how humiliating that was for Putin. Humiliating on the world stage. He lost a regime that he had been backing for decades. And he also lost access to the ports in the Middle East. And if that happens in Iran, he is going to be so isolated. The only person that's going to be picking up the phone is North Korea. And that's a terrible situation for Putin. And actually, it's possible. And I think they're panicking in the Kremlin right now because Iran was and is the last basically stronghold of influence that Russia has in the Middle East. It gives them access to water in the Middle East, right at the base as well. It allows them to fly over their airspace. It's hugely important, but it's also important on the world stage. Putin cares massively about the image of him, right? You've had the images of him on the horses, these ridiculous topless photos. You have these kind of photo opportunities he always does whenever any of the world leaders visit Moscow. Really trying to emphasize to the world, we're a serious country, we've got lots of friends, and we have lots of influence. Please listen to us, please take us seriously. If Iran, the regime, falls, literally within 12 months of Syria falling, Russia's going to look horrendous on the world stage. And I'm talking about all of this from the Ukraine perspective right now, because I know there's lots of conversations about why Trump did this. Should Trump have done this? This is all about Israel, Israel's plans. I'm not talking about why this happened. I'm talking about what the ramifications are for Ukraine. And they're huge. There's a lot of Ukrainians right now who are worried because the price of oil is going to go through the roof. That is going to happen temporarily. That's going to fuel Russia's war machine for a period of time. But the most important thing is the Shahed drones that have been flying every single night into the city. And last night it was many of them, hundreds. They're called Shahed drones because they are Iranian. And as far as Ukrainians are concerned in this country, and I speak to Ukrainians all the time, Iran has been bombing this country relentlessly. And they've not just been using the Shahed drones and supplying the blueprints for those drones, the drones themselves. They've also been training in Crimea Russian troops. They've been supplying massive amounts of military support to Russia because Russia doesn't have enough stuff to throw at this country. That's why they're also calling up North Korea and begging them for missiles. That's why the building that was blown up last night here in this city that killed 8 Ukrainians was a North Korean ballistic missile. It wasn't a Russian ballistic missile. It was a North Korean ballistic missile and Iranian drones. So if Russia loses Iran, it's good for Ukraine. And it's good also for the people of Iran. I was in Syria right after the fall of Assad. I was in Damascus for New Year's Eve, and I was asking people what they thought of Ukraine, and this is a clip of me there.
Behind me right now is proof that tyrants can actually be defeated. And as someone that's lived in Ukraine for the last 6 months and seen the chaos and destruction that Putin and people like Putin and Russia has wreaked on society.
And the point I was making with this is that when dictators fall, when regimes fall, we shouldn't be so terrified. Good things can happen. And Syria hasn't been perfect. There was an Orthodox church that was bombed just a couple of days ago in Damascus by Islamic extremists. And there have been problems in Syria since. But in terms of regime change in the Middle East, it's probably been the least bloody that's ever happened. And it was a good thing. It's a good thing that Assad isn't ruling Syria anymore. I interviewed so many people in Syria, victims of chemical attacks, that had been bombed relentlessly, civilians, children. And they had also been bombed by the Russians because the Russians supported Syria.
It's also important to remember just how hated the Iranian regime is by actual Iranians. Again, it's a dictatorship. This is footage filmed in the last few days of Iranians sitting on the outskirts of the capital of their country in Tehran, eating popcorn and laughing and filming and watching the bombings happen because they know that they are targeted against their government. And this doesn't include the fact that the Iranian regime has been jailing human rights activists, lawyers, journalists, and thousands of political prisoners for decades because they have ruled that country with an iron fist And Iranians deserve freedom and they deserve democracy.
The UN Human Rights Council has approved an international investigation into Iran's violent crackdown on protesters by 25 votes to 6, with 16 abstentions.
So taking a look back at the bigger picture and what this means for Ukraine and Russia, it's bad for Russia. It's bad for Russia if Iran falls. And also, from the Ukrainian perspective, it's a pretty bittersweet moment because I've been asking a lot of Ukrainians what they thought about the strikes, the US strikes by those stealth bombers against the nuclear facilities. And Ukraine has been basically one of the best countries on the planet to actually stick up for nuclear disarmament. They disarmed all their nukes in this country. The West told them to, and they did it. And they know what it's like in this country for a dictatorship or for an authoritarian regime like Russia to have nuclear weapons. They know what the consequences are of that. Because every single time Putin threatens the world to stop supporting Ukraine, they say, we're going to nuke the world. And they use that as their bargaining tool, right? They terrify and threaten everyone. So the idea that Iran could develop nuclear weapons and be another dictatorship, Ukrainians know what that looks like. So the also sad moment with it is a realization that America could have actually acted against Russia at any point they wanted to. The show of air superiority, air power, the fact that those stealth bombers flew for 37 hours, they took off from Missouri, bombed Iran, went straight back to Missouri again, because they had allies with Israel. They did it to help Israel. They did it because they saw Iran as an enemy and they saw Israel as an ally. And Ukrainians are looking at it and thinking, okay, so the US never really saw, or the US government, Ukrainians as an ally and Russia as an enemy. Because when you see allies and enemies and you treat them like they just did last week, it's the complete opposite of what they've done for Ukraine, which is slow drips of support. But obviously all of this is going to be changing over the next few days. So I'll bring you updates on what's going to be happening and what the reactions are here in Ukraine as well. Because people are watching this really, really closely because it deeply affects what's happening in this country. And again, so much of the discourse right now is about potentially oil prices going up. Oil prices have historically gone up and gone down during times of conflict. It just means Russia will have a bit more cash temporarily. But if it means Russia loses their biggest and last ally in the Middle East, that's far, far, far worse than for Russia than a bit of extra pocket money. So that's the situation. And you made it this far. Thank you so much for watching. And I will bring you an update same time tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks.